Hey guys, welcome to Elevated Systems. I'm your host CJ, and before I begin today's build, I want to take a moment to address the current global pandemic and how it affects not just this particular build, but the content of my channel as a whole. Now, I have several videos like this one that include build guides and links to each component you can purchase from online vendors, and in less turbulent times, I would say, if you want what I'm recommending, click the link and buy it. However, due to the current events, I would say maybe don't. At the time of filming, Amazon has suspended shipments of non-essential items to its warehouses, which means many of these components you may or may not actually be able to order right now. Now, you can very likely find everything you need from other vendors like Newegg or Best Buy, but those vendors still need to ship these items. Currently, the major shipping companies, UPS, FedEx, USPS, and Amazon are busy assisting state and federal governments in delivering testing and medical supplies to hospitals and delivering essential supplies and food to our elderly and at-risk populations. Because of all of this, I'm recommending that if you don't need a new computer right now, don't buy it. Because of this, I was actually not going to do this video, postpone it, but then I realized that there were a lot of people who have suddenly found themselves having to work from home, and many actually need a computer right now. My first thought was to do a virtual review of budget under $350 pre-built PCs and laptops, but after 5 minutes of research, I realized most of these types of systems have already been snatched up. So this video is for those of you who need a new PC right now. If you just want to dip your toes into PC building, maybe wait on that for now. With all that said, let's get to the build at hand and start by introducing all of the components, beginning with the CPU.
Priced at just $50 US, the CPU for the system is the AMD Athlon 3000G. This is a 2-core, 4-thread processor with an operational frequency of 3.5 GHz and is fully unlocked for overclocking. For storage, I'm using a 240 GB ADATA 2.5-inch solid-state drive, which will be adequate for holding our operating system and your basic suite of office applications. The motherboard is the Gigabyte B450M DS3H. This is a micro ATX form factor board from their ultra durable series. With an MSRP of around $72 US, it isn't the cheapest B450 board available, but offers some good features for the price and a fairly decent upgrade path. Powering the system will be an EVGA 450BR power supply. It's a 450 watt, 80 plus bronze rated PSU, and at $40 US after rebate is a great value for a reliable power supply.
Now, all the components here I ordered weeks ago. The only component I needed was the memory, and for this build I'm using a single stick of 8 GB DDR4 3200 MHz memory, and on the build list is the Team T-Force Vulcan Z at a cost of $36. That's what I'm recommending for this build. However, heeding my own advice, I decided not to order it, as I have an equivalent stick on hand, so I'll be using this same spec stick of Corsair memory for the build today. And finally, the case. Now for this starter desktop PC build, I kept the case as basic and inexpensive as possible. This is a Rosewill SRM01B, and at $29, it's the basic definition of the requirements of a PC case. A metal box that holds all your components. This one is definitely old school with a 5¼ drive enclosure and side panel fan mount, but it fits the bill for what we're trying to accomplish here today. But what are we actually trying to accomplish here? Well, first step, let's give you a general idea of how to assemble all this, and we're going to start by building the system outside the case. Now, I have a fancy setup here with a grounded anti-static mat on my workbench and a multi-bit iFixit toolkit, but honestly, you can do this at your kitchen or dining room table, and the only tools you need is a Phillips head screwdriver, and in this build, a pair of pliers. So let's start with the motherboard. Let's take the motherboard out of the box. Okay, and under here are your accessories. So we have a SATA cable, we need one of those. Definitely the manual, take that out. The I/O shield, we're gonna need that. Driver CD, don't bother with that. And the only other thing in here is a tiny bag with a tiny screw, and that's for installing an M.2 solid state drive, which we won't be doing, so leave that in the box so you don't lose it. So now what we want to do is take the motherboard out of the anti-static bag and place it on top of your motherboard box. This is where we're going to install all our components, starting with the CPU. So this is pretty easy. Just lift this lever here, then locate the corner of the CPU that has the arrow and line that corner up with the arrow that is right here on the motherboard. Place the CPU in the socket and lower this lever. It's that easy. Also, inside the box, you'll find the CPU cooler, and this particular cooler is about the easiest CPU cooler to install. Now, I've already done a build with this CPU cooler, so I need to apply some thermal compound, but if you're using it for the first time, it already has the thermal compound pre-applied, so you don't have to worry about that. Also, it just clips right onto the brackets that come pre-installed on every AM4 motherboard. Just line up the cooler. With the clips on the bracket and tighten down that lever, and the cooler is installed. Now you'll need to plug the fan cable into this CPU fan header right here, which is labeled CPU fan. And you do this by simply lining up the slot on the fan plug with the tab on the header and plugging it in. And now it's time for the memory. And this is where the user's manual comes in handy. Of course, this user's manual isn't actually a user's manual, but it does have a QR code you can scan with your phone to pull up an actual user's manual. Now, in this manual, it'll show you each of the memory channels and which one to install. However, this manual only covers installing 2 or 4 DIMMs or sticks of memory. So here's a crash course and a disclaimer. This board and CPU supports 2 channels of memory, meaning data traveling between the CPU and the memory has 2 lanes to travel on, and there are 2 DIMM slots per lane or channel. The slots are numbered starting from the outside furthest from the CPU, 1, 3, 2, 4, where slots 2 and 4 are channel A and slots 1 and 3 are channel B. Now, for a single stick of RAM, we want to use slot 2. So just open these 2 clips, line the slot on the memory with the notch in the channel, slide the memory in, and using firm, even pressure, just press it down until the clips clip into place. Now the disclaimer. By using only one memory module, the system can only operate in single channel mode, channel A in this case, which will affect performance as it introduces a delay in communication between the CPU and memory. However, for most common workloads of a desktop PC, this isn't anything you'll really notice. Now, if you're working on large spreadsheets or databases with multiple sheets of pivot tables or querying data from multiple sources across the network, then you'll want to upgrade your memory to a second 8GB stick for 16GB total. However, if you're just doing typical word processing or light to moderate spreadsheet work, or what's most common, you are working through a web portal or interface where the work is actually being done on a remote server and you just need a PC to access it, then the single 8GB stick will be plenty for now. I would say adding a second down the road should be your first potential upgrade. However, as long as it's the identical stick as the first. So don't go and buy another completely different memory module a month or two from now because it's a few bucks cheaper. Okay, this is the point I would actually recommend connecting the power supply and test booting the computer just to make sure everything is working before you get it all secured inside the case. Now, I used to do this, but I haven't really done it for a number of years. If you're new to PC building, it can save a lot of heartache if something is wrong, you have a defective part, or something isn't seated properly. You can fix it pretty easily. However, because we only installed 2 components, unless your motherboard is dead, anything else is easy to fix, so let's get it into the case. Okay, now again, this is just a $29 metal box, except for the front here, which is actually why I picked this $29 case as opposed to all the other $29 metal boxes. The front panel, while plastic, has a bit of a brushed aluminum look to it and just stood out from the other shiny plastic front panels. So the side panel comes off just by removing these 2 thumb screws on the back and sliding it to the rear. Okay, now inside here we have all of our front panel connectors. I'll talk about each of these as I plug them in, and here is our bag of accessories and screws. Oh, is that a good sign? A little sad face. How can we help? Are they expecting something to go wrong here? I don't know. I like the happy face. They give me. Yeah, it's probably not a good idea. Okay, so all the screws you need to install the motherboard, power supply, and hard drive typically come with your case. And in here are also the standoffs you'll need to install before you can install the motherboard. Now, a lot of cases nowadays come with the standoffs pre-installed, but at $29, not this one. This is also why we needed pliers for this particular build. Now, I have needle nose just because that's what I had handy here in the studio, but you can use whatever type of pliers or wrench you have to screw these in that work. So we want to install 6 of these standoffs in total. 2 here on the top, 2 in the middle, and then the 2 on the bottom. Okay, I'm also going to take off the back panel. And the front panel. This one comes off by just simply grabbing it underneath and popping it off. And then I'm going to remove these 2 screws. so I can swing this out of the way. And then this rear power supply bracket I'm also going to remove, because all of this will make your life much easier when we're installing the rest of the components. Okay, now because the power supply mounts on the top of this case, I'm going to install that first because I don't want to take the chance of dropping it on anything later. Now, as this case doesn't have any ventilation at the top, you want to make sure your PSU fan is facing down when you install it so it can properly cool the internal components. Now, either using the 4 screws that came with the power supply, or you can use the same screws that came with the case, you want to screw in the power supply from the rear in these 4 holes here. Okay, now the more difficult part. We're going to reattach this bracket. So what you need to do is slide it underneath all these cables. There's a little notch in the bracket. I'm gonna slide it into under these cables, and then what I recommend doing is screwing in, pushing it up against that PSU and screwing in one side first just to get it started, not completely tight. All right, and then pushing the other side up against the PSU and getting that one screwed in. This bracket is a little more difficult to reinstall when you have a non-modular power supply, because sometimes those cables can interfere with this, but it'll work. That actually wasn't too bad. Just tighten down both screws. All right, now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to find my 24 or 20 plus 4 pin connector in this case, my 4 plus 4 CPU cable, and one of my SATA cables, one of these SATA cables. Okay, now the rest of these cables I do not need for this build at this time. So what I'm gonna do, just kind of tie them off inside this 5 1/4 inch drive bay, which I'm not going to be using either. Okay, now it's time to install the motherboard, but before I do that, I need to install the I/O shield. So just make sure you take a look at how the motherboard is going to be installed to put this in right. But basically, these USB holes go on the top, and the audio holes will be down at the bottom of the case. And to do this, all you do is stick it in from behind, put it in from the inside of the case, and just press it into place. It'll clip right in along the sides. And that's it for the I/O shield. So, full disclosure, because I pay for all of this out of my pocket, to save some cash, I got this motherboard used on eBay for 50 bucks because it didn't come with any of the accessories, including the I/O shield. So this isn't the actual I/O shield for this motherboard. I'm just using it to show you how to install an I/O shield. So when I actually install the motherboard, there won't be an I/O shield in here, which is fine. I mean, who sees the back of a PC anyway? But now it's time to install the motherboard. And what you want to do is line up your I/O with your I/O shield while lining up these mounting holes with the standoffs we installed. What you want to be careful of is not to slide the bottom of the board around on those standoffs, as you can damage these soldered traces, which would be bad. It's a bit of a tight fit in here, but it will go. Okay, once you got it lined up, using these screws with the little thin lip on them, we want to screw it down into the standoffs that we installed. And you want to screw it in till it's just snug without torquing it down into place. It doesn't have to be torqued into place, just till the screw is snug. And in this case, you're going to install into all the mounting holes except for this one right here, because it just happens to be over this cable pass through here, so there isn't a standoff for it to mount into, which is fine. Okay, motherboard installed. It's time to plug everything in, and we're going to start with the 24-pin ATX power cable and plug it into the 24 ATX pin connector right here. Now, these plugs and ports have round and square connectors, so you can't really screw this up. You know, the whole square peg, round hole thing we all learned as toddlers. But just to be sure, make sure this clip is lined up with the notch on the connector. Next is the 4+4 cable. It's usually labeled either CPU or sometimes EPS, and that plugs in up here the same way. Okay, now once I get those done, I'm going to put the front panel back on. And I'm going to route all these cables where I need them to go, which in this case, they all plug into the bottom of the motherboard here. Okay, so I'm going to start plugging these cables in up at the front and work my way back, starting with the HD audio cable. This cable connects your front panel headphone and microphone jack. And like all these DuPont connectors are keyed, meaning if you look on the board, there's a pin missing, and then on the plug, there's a hole plugged. So if you just line that plugged hole up with the missing pin, you've plugged it in there correctly. Okay. Next is my USB 2.0. This connects my USB 2.0 connectors in the front, and we have two here. It really doesn't matter which one you plug it into. Again, this one is keyed. Next is our USB 3.0 connector. Now this one has a little notch on the cable, and then there's a little slot on the top of the plug here. Just line that notch up with the slot, and be careful those little pins. There's 19 little pins in there that are very easy to bend, so be careful when you plug this one in. And now we have our power switch and power LED connector. So if you look on this next connector here next to the USB-O, there's a lot of pins. We're just going to be using the top left 4 pins, starting with the first top left pin. That will be our power LED plus. So we'll plug the power LED plus into that top left pin, and then the power LED minus into the next pin. Next is the power switch cable. This actually connects your power switch, and that's on the next 2 pins. And if you just install it with the text facing down, you're fine. Okay, and then the final thing to plug into the board here is our rear fan, and we're going to plug it in right here to system fan 1. And you will notice that unlike the CPU fan, this one only has 3 connection points, or 3 holes in it, which is fine. You still just line up that slot on the back of the cable to the tab on the connector itself, and you're just plugging in those first 3 pins. That last pin will just be empty, which is fine. Okay, on to the final component, the SSD. And on this panel here, there are 3 mounts for 2.5-inch SSDs on the top, in the middle, and on the bottom. And I'm gonna mount this one on my bottom mount here. So it mounts in this way. I don't believe it'll fit on any of the holes this way, so we're just gonna line it up right there. These are basically the same screws that you screwed your motherboard in with. Well, not basically, exactly. Okay, now I'm gonna take my SATA power cable, and it really doesn't matter which one of the 3. Line up that little notch with the little notch there and plug it in. Then I'm gonna take my SATA data cable that came with my motherboard, and it really doesn't matter which one of these SATA connectors on the motherboard you use to plug it into, but I'm gonna just word of warning, the way this plugs in, if you plug it into SATA 1, which is the very bottom one, you're not gonna be able to get back to the clip if you need to unplug it. So for that reason, I'm just gonna plug it into SATA port 3. And again, it really doesn't matter. And then same thing, lining up the notch with the notch on the, just gonna plug that one in there. And now I can screw this tray back in. Okay, now the only optional part left is this little system speaker that came in the bag of accessories. Now, if there's something wrong with your system, this speaker will beep a certain number of times and allow you to diagnose the problem. For example, 5 short beeps would indicate there's a CPU error, meaning you probably need to pull out and reseat your CPU. Now, I typically don't use these, but again, if PC building is new to you, it's helpful. So if you want to install it, it plugs into the 4 pins on the top right next to where you plugged in the power switch. And again, with the text facing you, plug it in and you're good to go. And then finally, you can spend some time cleaning up this cable mess in here, getting it nice and tidy. It's not too big a deal in this particular case. You have a solid side panel. You can't really see it. These cables aren't really going to impede your airflow, but I have I'm a little OCD about this, so I'm just going to take some time. I'm going to tie up some of these cables out of the way. Okay, now typically in my build guides, I don't include peripherals, the monitor or keyboard mouse combo, because that's very subjective. I've always recommended you go to a Best Buy or Micro Center, somewhere where those things are on display, and find the one that's just right for you. However, today, not really an option for most of, well, the world. So to keep the overall cost of the system down as much as possible, today I'm recommending this monitor. It's a 20-inch 1600 by 900 75 hertz Scepter LED panel, and it comes in at just $69. If you want to move up to full HD, the 22-inch model will cost you about another $10. And for keyboard and mouse, I'd go with the Amazon Basic Wireless combo for 26 bucks. It's essentially the same combo I use on my main system. So with the PC coming in at about $250, with the peripherals, the entire system will cost you right around $350 to $360. Let me just get these plugged in and then we'll turn it on and make sure it boots. Okay, everything's plugged in. And here we go. Okay, and that's exactly what you should see if you did everything right. Now, as for setting this up with updated drivers and operating system and getting it running, I'm not going to get into that in this video because many others have already. In fact, Paul from Paul's Hardware did a great video on setting up a new PC and installing Windows. I'll leave a link to his video below. However, I will take you through a few of the settings in the BIOS screen for this system.
Prior to installing anything, the first thing you want to do is use the arrow keys on your keyboard or your mouse to go to the Save and Exit menu and select Load Optimized Defaults, and then select Yes. Now, arrow back to the BIOS menu and make sure CSM support is enabled. The system will not recognize your SSD if it's disabled. If for some reason it is disabled, hit the Enter key and then Enable. Now go back to the Save and Exit menu and select Save and Exit and then Yes. After you have installed Windows and have your computer set up, go back into the UEFI menu and in the MIT menu, arrow down to the Advanced Memory Settings and hit Enter. In this menu, select Extreme Memory Profile, XMP. Hit Enter and select Profile 1. This will set your memory frequency to the 3200 MHz and your memory voltage to 1.35 volts and all the correct timings. Now, arrow over to the Save and Exit menu again and select Save and Exit.
Okay, that's it for this one. I will be doing a couple of other videos on this system, including some free software alternatives and on potential upgrade paths, so be sure to get subscribed so you don't miss those. In the meantime, here are some of my other videos you can check out, including a great alternative to this PC using the same CPU but in a much tinier package. If you like this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up icon. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. And until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you again soon.